In the previous video, we discussed why international trade matters, or how does it stop or at least postpone the economic slowdown by importing the relatively cheaper food and necessities, okay, which eventually reduce the cost of production and increase the saving and the capital stock. Okay, so here in this video, let's check out two pieces of empirical evidence. Okay, now the first piece is about economic slowdown. Okay, we're looking at these economies from 1800 all the way to 2020. Okay, so over 200 years. And first of all, let's look at these Asian economies. This red one here in the middle is Japan. Okay, as you can see here, this big drop is because of the World War II. Okay, but after that, Japanese economy took off very quickly. This is what we call exponential growth. Okay, because the curve, the trajectory is so steep. Okay, but what's interesting is when it gets to 1970s, 1980s, when the Japanese economy, the Japanese income per capita got pretty close to the Western developed economies, such as Australia, Germany, Canada, and the US. There's a significant slowdown of their economic growth. Okay, so you would find that the curve of Japanese economic or the income per person was bent. Okay, and it gets much flatter than before. Okay, so the slope after 1980s was more or less the same as other developed economies. In other words, Japanese economy used to grow like a double digit per year. In other words, more than 10% per year in 1950s, 1960s. But after 1980s, the economic growth rate in Japan was often below 5%. Okay, in some years, even negative growth. Okay, as you can see here and here, it shrunk. Okay, and when you pay attention to the Asian tigers, like here, Hong Kong. Okay, I believe it's a yellow, pretty light yellow one. In Singapore, okay, and light green one or teal one. And you should also be able to find Korea, okay, and here, and Taiwan here, the blue one. Okay, again, they show exactly the same thing, but in different years in history. Okay, so for example, here in Taiwan, it continued to grow at a very fast rate till early 2000. Okay, and then it becomes slowed down. Okay, and if you look at India and China, they're still in the early stage of this exponential growth. Okay, so we could expect that later they would also have kind of the flatter curve. Okay, actually, when you look at China in the past 5 years, 5 or 10 years, you already find that the Chinese economy slowed down significantly. Okay, it used to grow like 10, 12, even 14% per year. Okay, and now the economic growth rate, even before the pandemic, was 6 or 7%. Okay, that's a huge slowdown. Now, is this unique to the Asian economies or their catching up experience? No, it's not. Okay, so on this chart, as you can see, even for Australia, back in 1800, when it caught up with other relatively richer or developed economies like UK, France, Australia experienced a pretty fast growth, just like Japan after World War II. And once Australia's income level caught up with the British one, then it slowed down. In other words, this is something universally true. Okay, it's been tested in Asia and in other areas of the world. Okay, so it's kind of the inevitable. Okay? Again, the economic thought or principle behind this observation is law of diminishing returns. Okay, in your Econ 100 course, your professor probably mentioned this to you. If in economics, if we name something as a law, that's what we believe. It's universally true, like law of demand, law of supply, right? Here, we call this law of diminishing returns, or diminishing returns to input. That means, we find this universally true or inevitable. Okay. But even so, we find that Asian economies worked very hard to postpone the slowdown. Okay, one of the ways they tried is to better involved in global trade. Okay, and so here we showed you whom Asia trades with between 1975 to 2025. Okay, and as you could say, Asia used to trade about 20% of the global. Accounts for 20% of the global trade back in mid 1970s, but that share continued to grow, and in 2025 it will be projected as more than 50% of global trade that had the Asian economy involved. Okay, what's more interesting on this chart is when we break down between the trade, the trade between Asia and the rest of the world, which is a dark gray or black one here, and the intra-Asia trade, which means the Asian economies trade with each other, okay, within Asia, and you would find that the Asian economies actually been more involved in intra-Asia trade in recent years. Okay, so as you can see that here, for the trade between Asia and the rest of the world, it has been much flatter in recent years. In other words, the growth has been smaller, right? It's still growing, but not as big as back in 1970s or 1980s. Okay, but the intra-Asia trade has been growing pretty quickly. Okay, so that's why you can see this orange area gets wider and wider. Okay, again, an incentive for them to be so actively involved in trade is to prevent, or we should say probably postpone, the increase in their cost of production. Okay, and so that they can still keep their food and other necessities prices low, relatively low, and they can still have a relatively higher saving rate. They can use their saving to finance their capital or the investment of machinery, equipment, and tools. Okay. All right. So here we already finished our discussion about David Ricardo's thoughts. Okay. He, of course, has a lot of interesting thoughts, but here, for the purpose of our discussion on the Asian economies, we narrowly focused upon his trade theory, okay, which is actually, what he's most famous for, okay? Especially comparative advantage, as we mentioned before. Okay, now in the next video, we're gonna talk about the third, I believe, great thinker, okay, or population economist. His name is Thomas Malthus. Okay, we're gonna discuss his findings on the relationship between population growth and economic development.